In this video, I'll introduce you to the online ecosystem function mapping tool and explain how you can undertake basic mapping operations. Now, if you haven't looked at them yet, we've also produced videos on explaining different ecosystem concepts like ecosystem functions and services and the terminology that we're using. And we've also created a video explaining the method that underpins the ecosystem function mapping tool and the related outputs in our project reports. So you can have a look at that if you're interested for background information and reference for what I'm describing in this video. Now, when you open up the online ecosystem function mapping tool, you'll end up with a screen like this, and what you're looking at is the Sunshine Coast region of Australia. That's the local government area and a bit of the adjacent water. And the total ecosystem function is being shown here. So that is associated with this little tick button here down on the right-hand side of my control panel. And that is overlaying 19 different ecosystem functions that you can see individually underneath that. And for a more detailed explanation of how that's done, please refer to the methods video. So I can zoom in with my mouse here and get a picture right away of where the ecosystem function hotspots are, if you will. That is, locations where many different functions are being performed at a high level. And I can see that by areas that are darker in color. So the darker purple color illustrates these ecosystem function hotspots. It's also possible for me to turn that off, and I think in fact it's useful for me to do that, so that I can show you how to map individual functions. So for instance, if I wanted to look at, let's say, pollination as an individual function, then I go down here to the EF layers for ecosystem function and click on this EF pollination, and now I get the map just of that one function, the pollination function. And recall from the methods video that that function is being performed in many different types of ecosystems, but the performance of that function is happening more in some ecosystems than others. So even you can see in this ocean environment, there's a high degree of pollination happening, of course, not the familiar pollination to us in terms of grasses and flowers and that type of thing, but instead the types of pollinations that occur in water systems. So I can zoom in and have a closer look at that and investigate different areas where high pollination function is occurring. Now, in this case, I'm showing locations where any different level of function is occurring. So, for instance, these lighter areas are associated with ecosystems that have slightly less performance. The dark areas are higher performing. And I can turn on, through this button here on the panel, the high performing areas. I can identify those with extra hashing. So if I click on this HF pollination, now what that's going to do is just show the locations that are 5 out of 5 in our expert scoring performance matrix, that is where the pollination function is occurring the most. And that's a useful tool then for looking at different function hotspots. Where is pollination? Is it actually being protected, for instance? Is it at risk from development, and so on? Okay, so in addition to mapping individual functions, I can map multiple functions. I could add together, for instance, pollination and also, for instance, shade and shelter, and overlay those. And each time I overlay, then it's looking at, for each different location, it's considering what functions are occurring there, the performance of each of them together, and aggregating those up and providing some aggregate map. So again, darker areas are higher performance of all 3 of those functions now. And if I were to tick the boxes on all 19 of these different ecosystem functions, I would get the total ecosystem function map that I showed you earlier. So in addition to those ecosystem functions, it's useful to recall what is happening underneath them, and that is the mapping of the different ecosystem categories. So that's up here in these ERC layers. So ERC stands for Ecosystem Reporting Categories, and as I described in the methods video, those are derived from the regional ecosystem types of that, in the version 12 database from Queensland. And we can see then that different, if I maybe back up here a bit more to give you a bit of a a view of the entire region, then I can look at where different types of ecosystems are located. So for instance, predictably, our coral reef ecosystems are off the coast there in the marine environment. I can start to add on different, now we've got some dune ecosystems and beach ecosystems. I can start layering these up to really find out, where different ecosystem types are, and those are associated with the performance of different ecosystem functions, and it allows me to investigate the two together. So now I've turned on lacustrine wetlands and dams and so on. You can see all of this starts to fill in more and more area as I tick more and more of these different ecosystem reporting categories until most of the entire Sunshine Coast region is associated, is designated with a particular ecosystem type. Okay, I'll let you play around with that, and I'll join you in the next video where we'll do some investigations then into different types of environmental management scenarios that this tool is particularly useful in investigating.